Thank you for joining me on another episode of She Leads Now podcast, where we help career and entrepreneurial women gain the tools to develop a success mindset, create winning strategies, build collaborative relationships, and take bold action towards creating impact and fulfillment in their lives and careers. I'm your host, Sabine Gideon, and I'm on a mission to awaken and activate women and emerging leaders so they can tap into their innate leadership ability, elevate their influence, and create the impact they were destined to make. If you're ready to up-level your confidence, courage, and influence, you've come to the right place. Join me weekly for insights, strategies, and resources to help you grow, develop, and embody the leader you were meant to be, so that you can make the impact you know you are called to make and establish the legacy you've always dreamed. The world eagerly awaits the emergence of your brilliance, impact, and influence. So with that, let's dive into this week's episode. Hey there, and welcome to another episode of She Leads Now. I'm your host, Sabine Gideon, and I am so excited and thrilled and just overjoyed to be sharing with the guest that I have on today, Miss Anne Harper. So Anne is a professional Swiss Army knife to those who know her best. She has 15 years of professional experience in the talent space, including in-house and consulting leadership roles in diversity, equity, and inclusion, talent acquisition, learning and development, and executive retained search. So welcome to the show, Anne. So excited to have you here.
Well, it is such a pleasure. It's always a delight to see your smiling, shining face and to reconnect after a little time apart. So let's just jump right into it. So as you said, I've had this really rewarding and validating professional career. I've had lots of opportunities to grow. And I think, if anything, I hope that people are encouraged, because when I started out, I definitely was not on a career path. I had what looked like from the outside an upper middle class upbringing, but there were just some really basic cultural capital things that I didn't know, and nobody was cluing me in on that I think other people did know. Things like get an internship or do this or don't take time off from college. So I did a lot of things the hard way. And that means that I started, I'd say probably easily the first 3 to 5 years of my work journey was just a series of jobs where I knew I could do things and make money and support myself doing that. But it definitely wasn't anything that amounted to a career. So one of the pivotal moments for me was really when I took a risk. And looking back on it, I don't know how I had the wisdom or the inner fortitude to do it, but I took a cut in pay and I joined DreamWorks, the entertainment studio. And that sounds like, on the face of it, it sounds like dream job. Who wouldn't want to be there? But I was going to be an executive assistant and an office manager. I had been working in professional services, and I thought, well, I don't want to support someone else, but I don't necessarily care about financial services or commercial insurance. And so there's a saying I heard somewhere along the way that always stuck with me. And it said, it doesn't matter how high you climb on the corporate ladder if your ladder is leaning against the wrong building. And so what I was realizing was, about 4 or 5 years into my career, I was doing really well, making good money. I felt so grown up for the first time. I had a key card and all of that, the trappings, so to speak. But I realized that it didn't really mean that much to me. It was a job. And I had always been an avid consumer and fan of entertainment, reading, TV, books. And so I thought, well, if I could build something in an industry I actually care about, what would that be like? So that was when I took that big leap of faith. I took a cut in pay, started off with someone who was so brilliant, but frankly, before I joined, it was terrifying. People warned me, like, are you sure you want to go there? Because she's gone through like 7 or 8 people already in just a year. And so there were plenty of reasons for me not to do it or not to take the risk. But I just trusted my gut. I met her and I thought, she's brilliant. I can understand why people would find her intimidating. But I trust that what we can build together will be irrelevant. The past will be irrelevant to that. And so I just want to show up, do great work, and then hopefully the opportunities will follow. And I advocated for myself really early on, surprisingly. I said, if you hire me to do this, I will be the best office manager that you've ever had. But that's because this is not my career. I've got experience, but I've got bigger aspirations too. So if I kick ass in this job, I would love your support 18 to 24 months from now, once I understand the inner workings of the studio, to create a career path for myself somewhere else in the organization. And we agreed, and it was like a gentlewoman's agreement. And that's exactly what happened. That's what set me on a path in human resources.
I didn't know that part about your journey, that it was you taking this leap and taking a chance on yourself. But more importantly, I mean, the work that you've done, and since then, right? You're now working in an organization where you are helping companies build programs and processes around their people, literally from scratch again. And a lot of it is rooted in inclusivity. It's rooted in allowing people to feel like they belong and recognize the diversity and the equity. So I'd love for you to share with the audience, what is it about that space that drives you and that has led you to build your career in that aspect?
Sure. I would love to tell it, because I can tell you that even back when I took that risk and joined DreamWorks, I did not know that this is where I would end up. And fast forward, this is truly my dream job. I wake up every day so excited to work, so grateful. And as Oprah or Dr. Maya Angelou says, like, sometimes the universe has a bigger dream for you than you even have for yourself. And I really genuinely believe that's true for me. I'm going to rewind a bit, because this work is so meaningful, and it's because of the professional impact and the changes that I can help to drive in the marketplace and in the world at large. But really, it's all rooted for me in my personal story, because so first I was found as a baby, frankly, in Seoul, South Korea. And the super short version of it is, they didn't know how I showed up walking on the street alone. And so I was taken to a hospital, kept there in case a family relation showed up. I was walking on my own at that time. So they didn't know if I was lost or abandoned or walked away from a fatal car accident that claimed my parents or whatever. So I this huge mystery. It turns out I was only about 14 months old. When no one showed up to claim me, they gave me a Korean name, a Korean birth date. I was placed with a private foster family for a year and a half. And then at 2.5, I went halfway around the globe. I was adopted by my white parents and raised in the suburbs of New Jersey. And I was an only child for 3 years. And then I became the oldest of 5 adopted children. As I said, I'm Korean. My parents are white. I have another Korean brother, and my 3 youngest brothers are Puerto Rican. And so early on, even before we were a family of 7, I remember sitting on my dad's shoulders, and we would be, as a family, on the front lines protesting for farm workers' rights and advocating, doing community work. And this is when I was like 4, 5, 6. I didn't even really know what it meant. But what it meant for me was it planted and nurtured a seed of belief that you can actually change the world if you put the energy and effort and commitment and passion behind it. So that's one gift that I would say I got from my parents, is really exposing me to that part of the world and really believing I could make a difference. So that was a kernel. And as I can, think back on it, we were pretty much like a walking UN cohort, right? Like, we were not inconspicuous. And that showed up when I was like preteen and a teenager. There were often times that I instinctively felt like, oh, it would just be so nice to like not always get so much attention, to be like a little bit more ordinary and blend in. So pretty early on, I learned to embrace that we were different, that it was an opportunity to talk to people about our family and what that meant or what that looks like in the day to day. It also meant that I was exposed to a lot of ignorance and prejudice and bias, and a lot of really hurtful and sensitive comments or assumptions that people would make. But I think it most importantly, attuned me very early to thinking about social justice, power dynamics, identity, race, gender, all of these things that a lot of people take for granted, maybe until they go to college and take a course in like women's studies or something. So that was front and center in my life. And I didn't realize how much it would shape it until much later. But that was the seed that was always there brewing. And so then when I started on this path in recruiting, I just realized like this is a huge opportunity and such a gift and such an amount of responsibility because you're shaping the organization. Fast forward, got lots of global experience working in talent acquisition. And then the diversity, equity, and inclusion part came into the mix when I was at Sony Pictures because I worked with a boss who's now the chief diversity officer at Sony. And he was really committed and passionate about this work. And so I was there at a time when we really, as a studio, invested in saying, we're probably not doing as good a job as we could. And what can we do intentionally? How can we invest? This is more than just the optic. This is pre-social upheaval. But in any case, I really was able to see hand in hand how diversity, equity, and inclusion is really not something that sits in a silo by itself. It's really got its power in all of these incremental parts of an employee's life cycle.
I love the way that your personal experience dovetails into your professional experience and the work that you do. You live this life like you are diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging, all of the things. And so it's not performative. And you've been able to partner with organizations that don't necessarily they're not interested in the performative. They're looking for the transformation. They're looking for the impact. And they're looking to, like you said, change the world. One of the things that you said around Sony was that back in the day, they were at the place where they were like, hey, what we're doing is okay, but it's not good enough. And I feel like within 2020 or since 2020, like the world or all of the organizations had that same awakening, right? Like they had programs in place, they were doing things, but it was collectively a realization that we're not doing enough. And so I know that the work that you do today is literally with those organizations who realize they're not doing enough and they really, really want to make that change. So can you tell us a little bit about the impact that you're making today through the work that you do in the organizations who are really, really putting money and resources behind making the changes?
Absolutely. And you're so right. The world caught up. There were a lot of things that brought this front and center for people. I think doing this work, it's really interesting because 2.5 years later, what we've seen is the shine, the luster has come off of the revelation. And a lot of people, frankly, are fatigued. They don't even want to hear the terms diversity, equity, or inclusion anymore. They're burnt out on all sides of the discussion, whether you're the Black or brown person who has like 100 people blowing up your inbox saying they want diversity, but you still get ghosted like everyone else, or they still have the same ridiculous hoops that they're wanting you to jump through, or whether you're the company that's like, we also have business objectives. We need to make good for our shareholders, and we can't serve anybody, much less underrepresented talent, if we aren't a thriving, prospering company. So how this all shows up for me and how I work with clients in particular is really to meet them where they are, because sometimes that means really intentionally and explicitly with a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And oftentimes it means more generally through talent best practices. So one of the things that I do when we're working as a team with clients is we start off just by doing an assessment, but at every stage of the game, what we're really trying to teach them is how to keep 3 principles alive: curiosity, courage, and commitment. Because to do this work, to drive any kind of change, really does require those 3 things. And I'll start with curiosity because this is the reckoning that a lot of companies are having is we just got so comfortable being in the power position where we decide who's good enough to join our company they're privileged to join us and we want to make sure they're good enough for us, to what has really been a power shift in the marketplace. So candidates are demanding a lot more from companies. They're really thinking intentionally about, where do I want to invest my talents? What kind of companies do I want to help grow? So they're requiring and demanding a lot. But the curiosity piece is, a lot of companies haven't caught up with that reality. They're posting really boring job descriptions that have an exhaustive list of 25 to 30 requirements. They don't really think about what it means to tell their story in a way that will connect with candidates or with people who, especially people who are not actively looking for work. I think companies are getting better. We help them tell their story. We help them parse out what makes you different from your competitors, or what is it that you're doing that's making the world better in some way. That's the curiosity piece. The courage piece is, it takes a lot of humility, a lot of confidence to say, we're definitely not doing our best. We could do better. Or even, especially when it comes to this type of work, I don't want to think of myself as this type of person, as a person who's biased or who expresses prejudices of any kind. But we all do. Preconceived ideas are biologically wired into us for survival. So the courage piece is just to acknowledge that we're wired to seek out things that are familiar and similar to us, but to do something intentional and consciously to overcome that, so that our field of view can be broadened, so we can see talent through different lenses and not just keep looking for more of the same. It also means letting go of things that we're really comfortable and familiar with. That does take a lot of courage. And then the commitment piece is, whether it is going in and overhauling a company's employment brand, making sure they connect with more diverse talent pools, or helping them have brave discussions around performance. I think that's just an age-old problem, has nothing to do with DEI, but everybody benefits when managers do this better. How do you have real conversations and give constructive feedback? Some companies really have this, like, they wear it as a badge of honor to say, like, we're such a nice company, we really put people first. And that's great as a platitude or embroidered on a pillow. But in reality, it obscures the fact that constructive feedback, opportunities to grow and improve in our work, that's a sign of respect and trust. Sabine, if I give you feedback, that means I trust you're a professional and you want to grow. You don't want to stay stuck. So I think of this as like the friend who will tell you if you have broccoli in your teeth. That's what we do with our clients. We say, you may not be comfortable hearing this, but here's some of what we're observing. Here's some of what we think might be going wrong with your intentions and why it's not translating into interest from candidates. And better yet, we hold their hand and give them the tools. And we design workshops to actually give them a chance to awkwardly work through some of those things. So that's the commitment part, because these changes don't happen overnight. You don't just slap a new shiny logo or put some more diverse, colorful faces on your website and think that magically changes everything. It has much deeper roots in terms of who you're promoting and developing, who you're investing in, who stays, if you even notice who stays or who goes. There are so many elements of it, but curiosity, courage, and commitment are really the things that I think can anchor this type of work, both for the short term and the long term. And it's our privilege to help companies, whether they're starting up or enterprise companies that you really know well, but they know they just want to do better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. The curiosity, the courage, and the commitment, and those three different levels and how it shows up for the individual leader as well as the overall organization or group of leaders in there. You mentioned something, the field of view. I'm a little curious. What is the field of view?
Mm-hmm. Here's how that concept came up, really. We do a lot of work in tech and with startups, and Silicon Valley is notoriously homogeneous. And the problem is, even young founders or progressive founders who say they want to be more mindful, intentional, and inclusive as they're building their companies, these are huge wealth generating businesses, right? So if you're not in that circle or you can't break into that space, you're going to have fewer opportunities to grow wealth and build generational wealth. So when it comes to tech and startups in particular, they think they're doing progressive things, but they keep hiring the same people. They keep looking for the shortcuts. And that means people from their graduating class at business school, their Ivy League business school, someone who knows someone who went to their business school. It means that everyone that they know is so like them. And that's not just race or ethnicity, it's generationally, it's geographically, it's conservative or progressive or liberal politically. It's just all different ways of thinking about diversity. And that field of view is shockingly narrow. People want VCs and investors to take a big risk on their potential and see what they can do. And yet they don't turn around and do the same thing with talent. They want the same cookie cutter safe path. And so that's really where the courage comes in, to say, I really haven't hired anyone on my leadership team outside of my existing trusted circle. And there's some legitimacy to that, because frankly, when you're starting up, everything is scrappy, everything is lean. And so you need the fastest path forward. But when you get that first amount of breathing room, that's when I say, take a look at who you've hired. Who gets referred to you? Who expressed interest in your company? If everybody looks and sounds the same or has the same pedigree, then you need to really start doing some intentional work to broaden that field of view, because we're talking about the top of the funnel with talent. So if you're always looking for the same pedigree, it means you don't know how to recognize someone who's an up and comer, or maybe someone who went to an HBCU instead. You have very narrow perspectives on what success can look like. So that's what we really try to do, is help people shake that up and look at non-traditional backgrounds. It enriches the conversation. And frankly, it's the birthplace of innovation. If everybody has the same training and the same discipline and approach and the same sources of information, you're going to get a lot of the same things. So we try to shake that up and disrupt it and get people to mix it up a little bit more and challenge themselves to take a risk.
Hey there. If you have been listening to this show for any amount of time, you know that I am extremely passionate about helping leaders, professionals, entrepreneurs grow, advance, and make an even bigger impact in the world. And with this passion as my driving force, I have created the Strategic Growth Accelerator. This accelerator is something that I've been using with clients one-on-one, and I've seen clients make amazing progress towards their goals and even crushed their goals and gone beyond what they believed that they were capable of when we first started working together. The Strategic Growth Accelerator is a 90-day program where you and I work together one-on-one to identify and to create a roadmap for you to achieve or exceed one specific goal. The Strategic Growth Accelerator is not just for anybody, and I don't mean that in a mean way. It is for individuals who know exactly what they want to achieve, but are stuck, aren't clear on the first step to take, or maybe they just want the support and the accountability of an experienced coach to come alongside them, to challenge them, and to push them beyond the limits they've created in their own mind. If that is you, I would love to work with you. I only have a limited amount of spots simply because I want to make sure that I am available and have the capacity to support you in any way that you need during the 90 days of us working together. Learn more about the accelerator and about the process at SabineGideon.com/accelerator. Again, that's SabineGideon.com/accelerator. I am so excited to really help you make 2022 your best year yet. If you have goals that have been sitting on the shelf or sitting in your mind or sitting on your whiteboard that you know you want to complete and or want to achieve this year, this is the program for you. Head over to SabineGideon.com/accelerator and sign up for a consultation for me to learn more about your goal and for us to decide if it makes sense for us to work together. So again, SabineGideon.com/accelerator. I cannot wait to work with you this year. See you inside the accelerator. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. As you were talking, you and I have experiences in partnering with organizations who, again, they realized they weren't doing enough and they wanted to do more. But unfortunately, their level of wokeness just wouldn't allow them to see the truth or to uncover that layer, to even get to the place of, let me come at this from a place of curiosity or from a place of courage and having the tough conversations or putting that mirror up to look at my own bias. And I'm sure for those who are listening, I know I have audience members who are entrepreneurs who are building their enterprises and trying to figure out, like, how do I establish a culture that is inclusive from the beginning? I know I also have individuals who are professionals on the leadership track within their organizations, and they're trying to figure out, how do I influence or impact my sphere of influence within the organization? So just basic for whoever is listening when it comes to applying the curiosity, the courage, the commitment to yourself first, right? It starts with you. What advice would you give to them in terms of being able to just dissect those three areas personally first?
Well, it's such a great question, because one of the things that I find is, to your point, people's sense of identity is so rooted in this idea that I'm a good person fundamentally, which means, of course, I wouldn't be biased or make assumptions about people. So I say discard that just right out of the gate. It doesn't serve us. Instead, let's say that we just all adopt a growth mindset that says, even if I think I'm doing well, I know I can be doing better. So let's just start there. What I recommend for people is to reflect on moments when they maybe weren't curious enough or courageous enough. Everybody has that. It's like, you think of like the grade school taunting or some kind of like interaction with like a bully, let's say. And it's always like 10 minutes later when you're on your way home that you're like, oh, I should have said this, right? We all have some version of that in professional settings or in social settings, with a relative who said something that was like, this is more than just being politically correct. Sometimes it's just honestly, people don't know better. And so we have to, so I always say, take some of those real world examples and imagine what you would say differently. How could you have changed their perspective? Not change their opinion, all their beliefs and their foundation and their identity. It's not about any personal attacks, but how could you ask a question or disrupt that moment in a way that would get them to go, I didn't even realize that's what I was doing, or I didn't even know that it might have that effect on someone. So, for example, we at our company, we get to share in our weekly team meetings something that is like, we call it a reflection moment, and we take turns doing it. So you're supposed to share something that is meaningful to you, that maybe motivates you or like inspires you and who you are, core to your identity or something. And what happened was, just like literally through happenstance, 3 or 4 weeks in a row, the people who got chosen to share randomly, and then the sharings that they had were all very, if you think of like professional sports, like it was very much about performance and competition and drive and pushing through the pain. And it was just hyper, what I perceived as like aggressive. Now, I'm a really competitive person. I love to win. So there's nothing wrong with that inherently. But what I noticed was, cumulatively, it seemed to be saying a narrative like, this very aggressive, competitive mindset is how we're going to grow as a company, or the mindset we should be adopting, because it emerged as almost a theme. So in that moment, I actually did have to like talk myself into it, but I just used that as a platform to say, this type of approach will really get some people hyped up and energized and ready to tackle the world and all of the challenges that might come up. On the other hand, it might not land as well with some other people who might be more introverted or more cerebral. Don't think that this is the only way that you can meaningfully contribute to the company. There's room for all of us with our own respective talents. It really is just, again, that idea of disrupting what looks like it's a new narrative. It's this hyper aggressive, competitive thing. And so if you go back to any of those moments, the person who talked over one of your colleagues, you could practice saying, oh, excuse me, before we move on to that point, I think Grace was trying to say something. Let's give her the floor. And what I find is if you actually practice saying some of those things in advance, you'll have the language. It won't be 10 minutes later that you think of it, because then it's awkward. But it's never too late to apologize. Just let me say that also, because we won't get this all perfect. But giving yourself a chance to practice that and saying, you know what, I realized in our leadership meeting, we brushed aside this idea. Let's revisit it. Or I could have done better in making room for the people who are a little bit more soft spoken, leaving a little more room to invite them into the conversation or leave space. So that is my advice. Take some time to think about the different situations that show up in your day-to-day life, whether that's in a work setting or personal setting, and just start practicing retroactively what you would have done so that you can get more comfortable with it. And then the next time that moment arises or something similar, you'll be prepared to say it. If each of us did that on a daily basis, it would have like rippling in the pond effect. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I love how you've broken it down into like these things, these situations that we've all been in. And to your point, there's always that, dang, I should have said this, or I could have done that. And I think it's the first piece of this is around not pretending to be so woke that you understand the issues and the impact, but being hyper aware of your environment, being hyper aware of what's happening around you. And I think we've just been in this space where it's do. Like you got to get done. You got to move forward. There's a meeting that's scheduled. Yeah, there's a meeting that's scheduled on top of the next meeting, and you're trying to get to the next place. And so we've all been so consumed with ourselves and our experiences and what's on our plate. And so what I hear you saying is it's just having your own pattern interrupts. And in your moments, like when you're in the moment, whether it's on a Zoom meeting or you're in a boardroom or wherever it is that you are focused in that moment. You are present. You are listening to what's being said. You are observant of what's happening around you, who's engaged, who's making eye contact. And then that makes you alert enough to catch opportunities to be courageous in speaking up on behalf of yourself or on behalf of someone else.
Yes. And one thing I want to say, because here's the good news. It can sound like work. And it is a little bit, because it does require you to be intentional in the beginning, just like making any lifestyle change, learning a language, getting more fit, cleaning out your pantry. It does require some intention and effort initially, but a year from now, if you do this consistently, you won't even have to think about it. So I talk about going from consciously being unbiased so that you create opportunities to mitigate bias when it shows up. But if you do that enough, it just becomes the norm in your organization. And again, it isn't just benefiting underrepresented talent. It isn't just benefiting women. Everybody wants to be heard. And frankly, companies thrive when they tap into those talents, those voices that are often unheard. So, and I totally meant to echo that point, because often those of us who do this work or who think we're liberal and progressive are the worst when it comes to this, because it doesn't fit in with our picture. Let's just all assume that that's BS and we can all do better. And let's not let what we think we've done stand in the way of what else we could be doing righter. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, let's use it as a foundation, but it's not good enough. Let's just keep pushing until it just becomes the norm.
Love that. Well, thank you so much, Leanne. Thank you for the overview of the impactful work that you've been doing and the practical tips. So hopefully, audience, you're taking away as an action item to start paying attention to your own thoughts, your own surroundings, and looking for opportunities in areas where you can, again, speak up, advocate, or take a different action than what is your norm. So with that, I want to shift gears here into our Lead Hers Lessons and Learnings segment. And so I have a couple of rapid fire questions for you. Are you ready?
I'm ready, but not rehearsed, just so you know. I didn't want it to sound canned, so I'm just going to tell you whatever comes to the top of my mind first.
So you have been in a leadership capacity, you've supported leaders. Obviously, in the role that you are in right now, you are challenging and inviting leaders to become different versions of themselves. So when you think about you, yourself as a leader, how would you identify or how would you describe your leadership style and or your leadership philosophy?
This one is easy for me because it echoes the theme that I was talking about in doing this work. Curiosity, courage, and instead of commitment when it comes to developing people and leading teams, compassion is the third C for me. And it's how I like to live my life. Curiosity, courage, and compassion. That brings with it a host of different ideas, but it creates a lot of room for people to show up and cultivates trust. So they've served me well.
I love the C's. So when you think about in terms of growing, this is more so from an individual perspective, right? So being able to grow your career and advance in the capacity that you have, and even to this day in the work that you're doing, what networking strategies have you applied that have led to success for you in managing and advancing your career?
I think two things. One, don't just be one of those people who starts spamming everybody. To your point earlier, be present, be thoughtful and intentional. When you're reaching out to someone, know why it makes sense for you to connect. Make sure it's not a strictly one-sided affair. Make sure there's something that you're bringing to the table to make their world better in some way. So be really thoughtful. And then the other is, it's a war of attrition. A lot of people are self-conscious. Frankly, our egos make us think that we're more significant than we are. But the reality is there are plenty of people out there who are eager and willing to connect, but it does have to be on their terms when it's convenient. And so a lot of times people just fall out of that engagement because they get discouraged or they're like, I reached out a couple of times and I didn't hear back. So I would say have the self-awareness to know if you're like overstepping. But more often than not, if you stick it out and you keep the faith that you'll hear from that person when it's the right time, then you'll outlast 98% of the other people who are hitting them up. So
absolutely. I will be a advocate for building relationships all day long because I've seen the power of being able to do that from a very, very genuine place, both personally and professionally. So shifting gears here, what's one piece of advice, right? Given what you've experienced in your life, personally and professionally, if you could go back to a younger version of Leanne, what have you learned now at this stage of life that you would love to go back and to share with her?
Oh, it's something I'm working on every day, which is perfectionism is the enemy of progress. Just get in the fight. Do it messily, do it imperfectly. It relates to growing new skills. It relates to trying things you haven't tried before, facing your fears. But all of it comes down to, for me, saying, just do it, give it a try. At worst, you can get better. And I just don't believe in having any regrets. So that would be my gift to myself. If I could get that lesson even earlier, I would love to say progress, just keep moving in the right direction. And those little small steps will really add up to a meaningful journey.
Yes. And so I know that you are a super, super reader, right? So I know this probably is going to be hard for you to narrow it down, but can you think of a book or maybe a couple of books that have just been really pivotal for you in your success, whether that's personally or professionally?
Sure. You're right. So many come to mind. I will share two. One that I'm reading right now, it's called The Coaching Habit. It's so simple. It's exactly what I needed right now. How to take all of this information and all this stuff that's swirling around in my head and just simplify it down. How can I show up and be of service to people? And that is something as simple as what's on your mind. So the coaching habit is really helping me to talk less, but say more. And the other one is The Four Agreements, which I would have loved to have read and understood earlier on my journey. But just learning to not take things personally, knowing that you're showing up and doing your best. all of that is, and don't tell yourself stories. We're so guilty of that. So it would have saved me a lot of time and heartache and misunderstanding, and frankly, thousands of dollars and hours in therapy. So the core agreements that I love, and it's by my bedside.
I love that book. I've read it twice now. And actually, just recently, I did an interview with someone and they mentioned that book as one of their books again. So I usually take that as a sign that maybe I need to go back and read it again.
Telling you something.
Yeah, it's a great book. And you're right. I wish I would have read that in my 20s or even before that. Lots of heartache and pain and disappointment could have been saved. The last question that I have for you, as you think about your legacy, right? What will you want that thing, that defining thing that you get to leave behind?
I think about this a lot, to be honest, because it's informed like professional decisions I've made, personal decisions I've made. And I really, without being specific, I just have this sense in my heart and in my gut that says, I want to be a person that inspires people to see their own greatness. So like another way of saying that is to help them discover their talents that they might take for granted, or to feel encouraged or empowered to take a risk, to face a fear, to unlock their own potential, something they might have neglected or been like pressured by society to like shy away from. So if I can ask a question or give a word of encouragement or just spend a little time with someone in a way that helps them see what they're capable of, then I think that's like far greater than anything I personally could contribute to the world, is like unlocking the potential of so many other people. I would love for that to be my legacy, both personally and professionally.
And so if the audience is looking to connect with you, they have questions, either for themselves personally or for their organizations, how can they reach out and connect?
I am reachable through my work email. I'm on LinkedIn. I encourage, start building your network now by sending me a LinkedIn invitation. It's Anne Harper. I'm the head of advisory services at Creative Talent Endeavors. You can find me there. It has my contact information once we connect. And I always welcome questions, curiosity, feedback. I'm a lifelong learner, so I would love to hear from people.
Awesome. All right. So we will definitely include the links to your LinkedIn profile as well as your contact information at work there. Thank you so much for that. With that, we'll be back next week with another episode. Appreciate you tuning in. Have a great rest of the week. Take care. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of She Leads Now. If you found today's episode helpful or got a piece of insight that you plan to implement in your business or organization, I would love to hear from you. Connect with me on LinkedIn at Sabine Gideon, that's my handle, and send me a private message. Or feel free to go ahead and leave a review on either Apple or Spotify. I also invite you to share this episode with anyone in your network who you think might benefit from this content. Lastly, be sure to check the show notes and the description below for links to resources, including relevant downloads, articles, and any upcoming training. Until we chat again, have a blessed and powerful week.